A routine traffic stop. The early morning sun filtered through the oak-lined boulevard as Major General Marcus Darrow drove his unmarked government SUV toward Joint Base Andrews. He'd spent the past 2 decades serving his country, rising through the ranks on merit, valor, and an unshakable commitment to duty. Today, he was en route to a high-level security briefing at the Pentagon. He glanced at his watch. 6:47 a.m. Just enough time to grab coffee before the 7 a.m. roll call. He slowed as he passed under the speed limit sign, 30 miles per hour, thoughtfully planning his presentation. The buzz of the radio's morning show sputtered in the background. Marcus reached to adjust the volume dial, but before he could, flashing red and blue lights erupted behind him. He eased the SUV to a halt, heart steady but mind alert. A patrol car, marked Fairfax County Police, blocked half the lane. Officer Bryce Collins stepped out, his face cloaked in early morning shadow. He was tall, with a squared jaw, but his eyes betrayed impatience. Darrow pressed the window's control and it slid down silently. "Morning, officer," Darrow said, his voice measured. He offered a crisp salute. "Is there a problem?" Collins's gaze flickered to the Army insignia on the dashboard, then away. "License and registration." Darrow reached into his suit jacket. "Here you go." He handed over a wallet card and neatly folded registration. Collins took them with a curt nod. The officer studied the card as if it were a foreign object. "You know you were going 23 in a 30 zone?" "Yes, sir," Darrow replied. "I'm actually on my way to the Pentagon. Time-sensitive intel briefing." Collins' jaw tightened. "Do you have another form of ID? Something with your picture?" Darrow produced his military ID. Collins held it up to the light, scanning it as if trying to catch a forgery. After a tense moment, he slammed it onto the hood of the patrol car. "Step out of the vehicle." Shock rippled through Darrow's chest. "Officer, with all due respect, I'm well within my speed limit. If you have a problem, I can call the base provost marshal. Out. Now." The word came clipped, final. Darrow's jaw clenched. He stood, hands raised, eyes calm. "Sir, my name is Marcus Darrow, Major General, U.S. Army. I'm federally protected." Collins drew his baton. "Arresting you for obstruction of justice. Hands behind your back." Time slowed. Darrow's mind raced. Diplomatic immunity did not apply to domestic police, but false arrest of a general could trigger a major scandal. He complied, letting Collins snap handcuffs over his wrists. The patrol car's cruiser camera whirred to life. "Any weapons?" Collins demanded. "Just my phone and a government-issued sidearm," Collins scoffed. "You military types love your toys." He slapped the cuffs tighter, then radioed dispatch. "Suspect in custody, obstruction and speeding, transporting to Fairfax Station." Darrow forced his face into a neutral expression. Passers-by gawked as the general was shoved into the back seat. In the mirror, he watched Collins stride to the squad car, a hint of triumph in his posture. Inside the cruiser, Darrow's training kicked in. He cataloged every detail: badge number, cruiser ID, timestamps. He breathed deeply, mind crystal clear. He could feel the weight of the cuffs cutting into his wrists, but his calm betrayed no weakness. At the station, Darrow was booked. Name, rank, charge. A process he knew well from the other side. He answered questions with measured precision, refusing to rise to provocation. The sergeant glanced at his record and paused. "General Darrow, you're a real general. Why did Collins arrest you?" Darrow met the sergeant's curious gaze. "You'll have to ask Officer Collins." Hours ticked by. Darrow was held in a small interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent light stabbing his senses. His call to the Pentagon went unanswered. Security protocols meant he had to clear this false arrest first. He could hear muffled conversations beyond the one-way glass. Inside, Collins lounged, arms crossed, a self-satisfied smirk curling his lips. "General, it's an honor, but rules are rules." "You arrested me under the pretense of speeding," Darrow said evenly. "Now you're accusing me of obstruction. Explain." Collins shrugged. "You were uncooperative." Darrow stared. "You forced me to step out, even though I complied with every lawful order. I offered my credentials. You humiliated me." Collins leaned forward. Unless you want to file a complaint, you can stay here until morning. Darrow weighed his options. Filing a complaint would trigger internal affairs, but it would take days. His briefing started in 2 hours. Then he remembered his secure line. A direct line to the Joint Chief's office. Pentagon law dictates any command officer can request immunity review. He smiled. You're right. I'm uncooperative. He stood, turning toward the door. I'm calling the Pentagon. He pressed a hidden button on his sidearm's holster, activating the secure line. The red connect icon blinked to life. Collins's smirk faltered. Stop that. Darrow ignored him, tapping the line. Within seconds, a calm voice answered. General Darrow? Yes. I've been illegally detained by Fairfax County PD. I need immediate intervention. Understood. Sit tight. The line clicked dead. Collins snatched the phone. You're not calling. Darrow lunged forward, driving the cuffs into his palms. You have no authority. In the hallway, the sergeant barked outside the door. Officer Collins, unblock that line. Moments later, a flurry of activity. Uniforms scrambled, radios crackled. The two-way mirror lit up as detectives arrived. Darrow stood tall, shoulders squared. No longer a suspect, but a symbol of power misused. Within the hour, a captain in crisp dress uniform arrived. He flashed credentials. Major General Darrow, you're cleared. Officer Collins is under internal investigation for wrongful arrest. Darrow watched Collins blanch. He slipped the cuffs free. Thank you, sir. As he walked out, he lifted his chin. The glare of the station lights felt like spotlights. Outside, his SUV idled where it had been towed. He climbed in, radioed his driver. Take me to the Pentagon, and make sure Officer Collins sees every press release. Behind him, Fairfax County would wrestle with the fallout of a racist cop who tried to bring down a decorated general. But justice, like duty, always answers the call. Ripples across the Capitol. Major General Marcus Darrow strode from the awaiting motorcade into the sprawling lobby of the Pentagon, the weight of the previous morning's indignity still clinging to his shoulders. Despite the late hour, the building hummed with purpose. Service members and civilians buzzed past security scanners, briefcases in hand, faces focused. Darrow's driver fell in step at his side, and the general offered a curt nod before slipping through a bank of elevators. Every footstep echoed determination. He had a mission to fulfill, and nothing, neither false arrest nor malicious bias, would delay him. Outside, reporters clamored for scraps of footage. Television news choppers whirred overhead. Light reflected off their rotors. Within minutes of Darrow's release, the story had gone viral. Images of him in handcuffs flashed across every screen. Scrolling banners declared, "General arrested after traffic stop." Social media hashtags multiplied. # Justice for Darrow, # Racist PD, each a digital thunderclap. Darrow didn't watch. He trusted his spokesperson to manage the narrative. His focus remained on the classified documents awaiting him in the secure vault, intelligence that could alter global strategy. In the classified corridor, locked doors bore insignia of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Darrow presented his credentials, the guard offering a crisp, "Good morning, sir." Despite the late hour. Inside the secure council room, a semicircle of officers stood at attention. They watched as Darrow approached the central table, the low hum of the overhead projector flickering to life. On the screen, a satellite image of a hostile compound glowed under infrared scan. Darrow placed his palm flat on the tabletop, leaning forward. His voice carried the calm authority of a leader. Let's begin. As the briefing unfolded, Darrow's mind operated at full throttle. He outlined potential threats, recommended troop reallocations, and highlighted intelligence gaps. Each slide punctuated with crisp directives: diplomatic outreach, covert operations, contingency plans. Senior officers interjected with tactical questions. Darrow responded with clarity, weaving together geopolitical nuance and hard data. The room crackled with urgency. Nations teetered on fragile alliances. Yet even as he commanded the attention of America's finest strategists, Darrow's thoughts flickered to the personal. He'd soon face an internal affairs hearing, an exercise in hypocrisy. Back at Fairfax County Station, Officer Bryce Collins sat in a sterile interrogation chamber, blinking under harsh fluorescent light. Two internal affairs investigators entered, badges gleaming. "Officer Collins," one began, voice measured. "We're here to discuss the incident with Major General Darrow." Collins leaned back, feigning confidence. He repeated his flavor of events. The general sped through a residential zone, refused orders, obstructed justice. The investigators exchanged glances. They laid out video evidence, dashboard footage, cruiser audio, bystander recordings. Each clip exposed Collins's misconduct, his racist slurs, his refusal to verify credentials, his gloating tone. Collins' posture straightened as one investigator slid a bound report across the table. "Your actions violated department policy and federal law," she said. "Suspension is recommended pending criminal review." Collins paled. He sputtered denials, invoked his spotless record, but the evidence was inexorable. The investigator continued, voice steady. "A decorated general, unjustly detained. Public trust is eroded. This department cannot condone such behavior." Outside, Collins could hear the distant echo of media helicopters. The walls of his career were closing in. Meanwhile, at the Pentagon, Darrow concluded the final slide. Silence filled the room before applause broke out. He nodded, dignity intact. As officers filed out to put his directives into motion, Darrow lingered. He watched the empty chairs, imagining the immense machinery of defense humming behind every door. Then he activated a secure line to the Judge Advocate General's office. Within minutes, arrangements were made for his official testimony before a joint inquiry. Darrow's calm resolve shone. He would ensure accountability, not just for himself, but for every soldier subject to bias. Later that afternoon, Darrow found himself alone in his office, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the National Mall. He studied the horizon where monuments stood as silent sentinels to American ideals. A briefing aide slipped in, delivering a sealed envelope. The preliminary findings from Fairfax County. Darrow broke the seal. The report denounced Collins' actions, recommended departmental overhaul, and proposed federal charges for false imprisonment. Darrow exhaled slowly. Justice was not just personal vindication. It was a corrective measure for the system. He drafted a memorandum to the Secretary of Defense. Initiatives to reinforce anti-discrimination training, establish clearer protocols for coordination between military and civilian authorities, and launch a public campaign affirming the principles of equal treatment. Each sentence radiated purpose. Darrow signed the document with a steady hand. He placed it in the outbox, thinking of young officers, black and white, who looked to him for leadership. Today's victory would set a precedent. Night fell as Darrow exited the Pentagon, streetlights casting long shadows along the walkway. The digital billboards near the metro station still displayed his image, now with the headline, "General Demands Reform After False Arrest." Darrow paused, gazing at the words. His shoulders relaxed. The road ahead, a journey toward institutional change, would be longer than any deployment. But he was ready. He stepped under the canopy of trees, disappearing into the wash of evening light, determined to transform ripples of outrage into waves of reform, chains of accountability. The translucent glass doors of the Senate caucus room slid open with a hushed whoosh, admitting Major General Marcus Darrow into a chamber lined with shimmering oak panels. A semicircle of senators, pressed papers before them, and attentive aides in the wings awaited his testimony. At the center of the dais, Senator Elaine McCarthy, chair of the Homeland Security Subcommittee, tapped her gavel and nodded. "Major General Darrow, thank you for appearing on short notice. Today's hearing concerns the events of June 28, 2025, involving your detention by Fairfax County Police. For the record, please state your name and rank." Darrow rose, shoulders squared. "Major General Marcus Terrell Darrow, United States Army, Deputy Director of Strategic Operations." His voice, calm and measured, carried through the room. He had prepared meticulously for this moment. A detailed timeline, corroborating documents, and a folder of video stills capturing Collins' misconduct. Each slide would reinforce his insistence that no one, regardless of uniform, should wield unchecked authority. Senator McCarthy leaned forward. "General, Please describe the circumstances of your arrest. He began at dawn. The unmarked SUV, the lawful speed, Collins's refusal to verify his credentials, the pat-down of his military ID, the slurred racial epithets caught on the cruiser's audio feed. His words painted a vivid tableau of prejudice and power misuse. He maintained his composure, even as he recounted the moment Collins slapped the cuffs closed. It was not merely an affront to my dignity, Darrow concluded, but a breach of fundamental American principles. As he spoke, aides projected dashboard footage onto the widescreen behind him. The glare of the cruiser's lights, Collins' harsh commands, Darrow's restrained compliance, all unfolded in slow motion. A murmur coursed through the audience. The evidence was undeniable. Next, the panel's legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit, rose. "General, did you file a formal complaint with Fairfax County Internal Affairs?" she asked. "I did," Darrow confirmed. "I also requested immediate review under the Federal Civil Rights Act. My objective was to ensure that this incident couldn't happen to any service member, or any citizen, ever again." Senator Robert Hayes, ranking member, cleared his throat. "General, some contend that military officers shouldn't leverage their position to influence civilian law enforcement. How do you respond?" Darrow met Hayes's gaze. "Accountability transcends rank. My duty compels me to protect those I lead, and every American under the Constitution. If civilian authorities operate without oversight, democracy suffers." Silence followed. Darrow sensed the tide turning. The senator's question shifted from procedural to systemic. Could Fairfax County establish better training? Should federal oversight expand? Did this incident reflect a broader problem across the nation? When the hearing adjourned, Darrow was ushered into a small anteroom. There, Assistant Attorney General Kimberly Rossi awaited, her expression grave but respectful. "General Darrow, the Department of Justice is opening a federal inquiry into Fairfax County PD," she said. "Your testimony was compelling. We'll consider civil rights charges against Officer Collins and explore federal guidelines to prevent similar abuses." Darrow inclined his head. "Thank you, ma'am. My hope is not retribution alone, but reform." Meanwhile, in a starkly lit interview room at Fairfax County Internal Affairs, Officer Bryce Collins sat with his defense attorney. Collins stared at the table, defiance etched into every line of his face. The IA investigator slid a thick file to the attorney. Video stills, audio transcripts, eyewitness statements, all corroborate General Darrow's account. "Unless new evidence emerges, your client faces disciplinary action and possible criminal charges." Collins shifted. "He was speeding. He showed me attitude." His attorney closed the file. "Officer, these allegations, particularly the racial slurs, are severe. You need to decide, plead to a lesser offense or fight it out." Collins clenched his jaw. He thought of his badge, the years he'd spent chasing suspects, the camaraderie of roll calls. Now it felt tainted, unraveling under the spotlight of public scrutiny. Outside, protesters gathered at the Fairfax County station, placards aloft. "Equal justice. End police racism." Local news crews captured the chants. Collins wondered if his career and reputation would survive the fallout. Back at the Pentagon, Darrow convened an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The conference room hummed with quiet intensity. Brigadier General Sarah Nguyen, his deputy, reviewed a timeline of events. Colonel David Harris, head of policy, presented a draft of proposed reforms: mandatory implicit bias training, interagency credential protocols, civilian oversight liaisons embedded in police departments nationwide. Darrow listened, weighing each recommendation. "These measures are vital, but they must be actionable and enforceable," he said. "We need signed agreements between the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, and major police unions. We must also empower soldiers and officers to report misconduct without fear of reprisal." Nguyen nodded. "We can pilot the program in key jurisdictions, Fairfax County, Los Angeles County, Cook County, before scaling nationally." Darrow tapped his pen. "And we'll monitor metrics, reduction in civil rights complaints, improved community trust surveys, Progress must be measurable. As dusk settled, Darrow exited the secure complex and retreated to his private quarters on base. His wife, Dr. Elena Darrow, awaited him. A renowned psychologist specializing in trauma, she had guided him through long deployments. Tonight, she gently peeled off his tie. "How did it go?" she asked, concern in her eyes. He exhaled, fatigue softening his features. "They listened. DOJ is in. Reforms are in motion. But this is only the beginning." He paused. "I testified for every soldier who's ever been threatened by bias, and for every woman and man of color who's ever felt less than equal under the law." Elena cradled his hand. "You're making a difference. Promise me you'll rest." Darrow smiled, a rare, genuine curve. "After I draft tomorrow's amendments, I'll try." That night, messages lit his secure phone. Commendations from civil rights groups, inquiries from news outlets seeking interviews, letters from service members thanking him for standing up. Each message reinforced the gravity of his mission. In Fairfax County, Officer Collins slept fitfully in his apartment, haunted by televised replays of his own words. His phone buzzed with missed calls. IA investigators, his attorney, colleagues pleading for an explanation. The next morning, he would decide whether to accept a plea deal or fight on principle, though the principle he thought he upheld now felt hollow. Across the Capitol, ripples became currents. Senators drafted bipartisan legislation, community leaders rallied for oversight boards, and the Pentagon prepared to sign its first interagency memorandum. Chains of accountability, once theoretical, were forging under the weight of a single unjust arrest. Major General Marcus Darrow lay awake until the stars dwindled, envisioning a future where no uniform, civilian or military, could override the rule of law. As dawn approached, his resolve crystallized. This chapter of his life, one marred by prejudice, would be remembered not for the cuffs that bound him, but for the chains of accountability he helped secure. Fractures in Fairfax. Officer Bryce Collins stared at the envelope on his kitchen table, the county seal stamped in crisp blue ink. Inside was his formal notice of suspension. 30 days without pay, pending the outcome of both the Internal Affairs Review and the federal civil rights investigation. The words blurred before his eyes as memories of that morning flooded him. Blue lights, the general's calm defiance, the devastating glare of nationwide scrutiny. He had always believed that the badge stood for order and authority. Now he wondered if it had ever truly stood for justice. Across town, the Fairfax County Police Station's once bustling lobby felt hollow. Community members gathered outside the glass doors, their placards held high. Trust but verify. Fair play for all. No more racial profiling. A dozen young activists, students from George Mason University, chanted slogans, their voices echoing down Main Street. Local news vans lined the curb. Cameras panned from the protesters to the station's front desk, where Sergeant Maria Alvarez monitored the scene with a furrowed brow. Inside, Alvarez convened her lieutenants in the break room, its linoleum floor stained by decades of spilled coffee and weary boots. Lieutenant Derek Ng adjusted his tie, glancing at the live feed on his smartphone. "The community is losing faith," he said. "Daily press conferences, public town halls. People want accountability now, not later." Captain Serena Blake folded her arms. "We initiated implicit bias training 6 months ago, but that's not enough. We need transparency. Publish use of force data, traffic stop demographics, complaint resolutions. Show the public we're serious." Sergeant Alvarez nodded slowly. "I'll draft a proposal for our next chief's meeting. Meanwhile, we keep internal lines open. Officer Collins has the right to his defense, but we can't let one officer's actions taint the entire department." She paced toward the window, watching protesters. This is bigger than Bryce Collins. Meanwhile, General Darrow had returned to active duty responsibilities, but his calendar brimmed with reform meetings. Today, he hosted a delegation from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. In the secure conference room, 6 attorneys and analysts surrounded the oval table. Darrow opened the session with thanks. "Your inquiry has laid bare systemic vulnerabilities," he said, voice resonant. Our goal is not only to penalize wrongdoing, but to fortify our institutions against it. He slid a stack of draft protocols across the table. A new model for interagency credential verification, joint military police oversight committees, an app-based portal for reporting discrimination in real time. Lead attorney Malik Carter examined the documents. These are comprehensive. Our focus now shifts to implementation. Pilot programs, funding streams, legislative backing. We'll need cooperation from county law enforcement, state legislatures, Congress, and public buy-in. Darrow leaned forward. My office will liaise directly with the Attorney General's office to secure federal grants. We'll also brief heads of the Council of Governors and the National Governors Association. State-level support is critical. Carter tapped his pen thoughtfully. If we unite federal, state, and local stakeholders, we can establish a durable framework. This could become a national model. Outside the secure compound, Emma Reyes logged off her laptop and closed the press log. As the Pentagon's public affairs officer, she had orchestrated the media response to Collins' arrest and the ensuing reforms. That morning, she'd drafted talking points for the Secretary of Defense's appearances, emphasizing zero tolerance for discrimination. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests. Cable networks, national newspapers, podcasts. Her phone buzzed. An alert from Capitol Hill. Senator Elaine McCarthy wanted an update on the joint DOJ-Pentagon working group. At the same time, Fairfax County's chief of police, Thomas Brennan, had requested a face-to-face debrief. Reyes exhaled. The media storm wasn't close to subsiding. She scheduled calls. First with the senator's office, then with Chief Brennan, then with her own command to prepare an executive summary of progress. Back in Fairfax, community leaders pressed for direct dialogue. Pastor Samuel Whitaker of New Hope Baptist Church convened a town hall meeting in the church basement. Rows of folding chairs filled with residents, students, parents, retirees, each bearing the weight of personal injustices. The stained glass windows cast kaleidoscopic patterns across the linoleum floor. Pastor Whitaker opened the meeting by recounting his own decades-long advocacy for police reform. Then he invited Officer Collins to speak. Collins shuffled to the podium, his uniform replaced by plain clothes. He cleared his throat. I want to apologize for my actions and my words. I failed to treat Major General Darrow as I should have. That failure reflects problems bigger than me. His voice cracked. I'm committed to change, to listening, to learning. A tense hush settled over the room. Some faces softened, others scowled. A university student, Maya Patel, stood and spoke sharply. Your apology is a start, Officer Collins, but we need concrete action. Will you attend bias training? Participate in community forums? Help us build trust? Collins nodded emphatically. Yes. He paused. And I'll volunteer for civilian ride-along programs. Let residents observe police work firsthand. Pastor Whitaker signaled for calm. This is honorable, but change requires accountability at every level. We'll work with the department to ensure follow-through. As the meeting adjourned, Collins walked among congregants, shaking hands. Some offered cautious smiles. Others barely met his gaze. He felt the chasm between officer and citizen. Deep, painful, but perhaps bridgeable over time. That evening, Major General Darrow received word of Pastor Whitaker's meeting. He smiled at the text from his aide. Collins appears to be engaging with the community. Good signs. Darrow thumbed a reply. Community partnership is key. Keep me posted. Then he drafted a tweet. Constructive dialogue tonight in Fairfax County. Heartened by efforts toward mutual understanding. Serve and protect. Across the network of efforts, Pentagon policy labs, DOJ investigations, county reforms, church dialogues, the pieces of change began to coalesce. Yet beneath the surface, tension simmered. Fairfax County's police union had threatened to strike over perceived outsider meddling. Opposition voices on social media questioned whether military leadership should influence civilian law enforcement. Conservative pundits accused Darrow of overreach. In his Pentagon office, Darrow reviewed a dossier of opinion editorials, both laudatory and critical. He recognized that reform always provokes resistance. He drafted a response memo to senior leaders. Prepare clear communication plans addressing concerns about separation of powers. Emphasize synergy, not supremacy. Highlight success stories, town halls, reduced complaints, improved trust metrics. He leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. The battle for justice extended beyond a single arrest. It was a contest for the soul of public service. As midnight approached, Darrow gathered his things and headed for the exit. In the hallway, he paused at a bulletin board where a local newspaper clipping was pinned. Protesters applaud Fairfax PD reforms. Beneath, a smaller headline read, "Cop accused, but community offers redemption." Darrow walked on, contemplating the fragile alliance between authority and accountability. The fractures in Fairfax County were real, but so too was the hope of healing. And in the balance between outrage and reconciliation, between punishment and restoration, he saw the true measure of leadership. Tonight, the ripples of one false arrest had grown into a tide of change, and the journey was only halfway complete. Shadows of reform. The pale dawn light filtered through the blinds of Major General Marcus Darrow's study as he settled into his leather armchair, a steaming mug of coffee cradled between his hands. The previous days had been a maelstrom of hearings, policy drafts, and public statements. Now, in the relative quiet before sunrise, he reviewed the latest metrics from Fairfax County: traffic stop statistics, demographic breakdowns, use of force reports, and citizen complaint logs. The numbers showed early signs of progress. Complaints down 10%, stops involving minority drivers down 15%. But the data also revealed stubborn disparities. Darrow tapped the report with measured frustration. Real change would require sustained vigilance, not a brief media cycle. His secure phone vibrated on the side table. It was Brigadier General Sarah Nguyen. He swiped the screen. "Morning, sir. I wanted to update you on the Pentagon's pilot reform rollout." Nguyen's voice crackled. "We've secured commitments from Fairfax, Prince George's, and Montgomery County to deploy our joint training module next week. Each department will host mixed ranks workshops alongside Army and Air Force personnel to simulate traffic stop scenarios, emphasizing video review feedback." Darrow nodded, though she couldn't see him. "Excellent. And the mobile reporting app?" "Beta tested with 20 volunteers. The interface is intuitive, though some suggested an option for anonymous but verified submissions. We're refining that now." "Proceed. And schedule a call with the secretary today. We need to present next quarter's budget request." "Understood, sir." Nguyen hung up. Darrow took a long sip of coffee, letting its warmth anchor him before stepping into another demanding day. Later that morning, he joined the Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General in the Roosevelt Room of the White House. Sunlight glinted off polished mahogany, and the portrait of FDR looked down with quiet vigilance. The Attorney General, seated to Darrow's right, reviewed a briefing slide. Federal Civil Rights Investigation, Progress and Recommendations. Below, bullet points outlined proposed charges against Officer Collins, DOJ grants for reform, and the deployment schedule for joint workshops. The Secretary of Defense leaned forward. "General, these metrics are encouraging. But we need buy-in from state governors. Can you lead a presentation at the NGA Summit next month?" Darrow inhaled. The National Governors Association meeting in Chicago was a prime opportunity to extend the pilot nationally. "Yes, ma'am. I'll coordinate with your office on the speaking points." The Attorney General added, "We're drafting an executive order to require all law enforcement agencies receiving federal grants to adopt our credential verification protocol. It'll be ready for your review by Friday." Darrow nodded. "That will ensure accountability, and we'll track compliance quarterly." As the meeting concluded, aides filed out to implement action items. Darrow remained a moment, absorbing the weight of his role, the architect of reform, born from prejudice. By midday, he was back at the Pentagon, reviewing training materials alongside civilian police leaders. Chief Thomas Brennan of Fairfax County PD sat opposite him, poring over the curriculum. Brennan, stoic but sincere, asked pointed questions about the scenario scripts and de-escalation drills. Overhead, cameras recorded the session for instructional use. Darrow observed Brennan's engaged posture, hopeful that skepticism would yield to partnership. Across town in Fairfax, Officer Bryce Collins attended his first bias awareness workshop. The training room, a converted municipal conference center, was arranged in a circle. Seated among a dozen fellow officers, Collins glanced at name tags: 2 Latino, 1 Asian American, several white colleagues. At the center, facilitator Dr. Aisha Khan, a community psychologist, welcomed them. Today, we examine the implicit assumptions we carry into every encounter, Dr. Khan began, voice both gentle and firm. Your experiences shape your perceptions. Our goal is to recognize bias before it determines our actions. They watch traffic stop reenactments on screen, officers approaching vehicles, interactions scripted with varying racial and gender identities. After each clip, participants discussed what influenced their expectations and whether they noticed unequal treatment. When Collins's turn came, he admitted discomfort. I used to think the badge gave me authority to set the tone. Now I see that tone must be set by respect. Dr. Khan nodded. Admitting the problem is the first step. Next is accountability, holding ourselves to standards higher than public expectation. Collins scribbled notes. He resolved to attend civilian ride-alongs, participate in community forums, and welcome feedback. This time, he would not merely sit through the workshop. He would transform his mindset from enforcer to guardian. Back at the Pentagon, General Darrow prepared to record a video message for police unions nationwide. The teleprompter displayed his carefully chosen words: gratitude for law enforcement dedication, acknowledgement of systemic flaws, and an invitation to collaborate on reform. Dressed in his service uniform, he pressed record. His voice, steady and compassionate, carried across the digital waves. As Americans, we owe our safety to those who serve on our streets. Yet, to earn trust, we must ensure every citizen sees in law enforcement a protector, not a threat, to police officers everywhere. I stand with you in service of our shared ideals. Let us work together to build a system worthy of the public's confidence. After filming, he reviewed the playback. It captured sincerity, humility, and resolve. He sent the footage to the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office, knowing it would reach thousands of precincts by week's end. That afternoon, Darrow convened his senior staff to assess early feedback. Brigadier General Nguyen reported enthusiastic responses from participating departments, tempered by concerns over resource allocation. Colonel Harris highlighted social media analytics. Tweets praising collaboration trended alongside criticisms accusing the military of overreach. Darrow considered both sides. He instructed his team to emphasize that this initiative was a joint federal-state-local effort, no hierarchy, but partnership. Meanwhile, in the Fairfax County courthouse, the first pretrial conference in Collins' case took place. Officer Collins sat beside his attorney as prosecutors outlined charges of false arrest and civil rights violations. The judge scheduled the trial for 6 weeks hence and encouraged both sides to consider a plea agreement. Collins, glancing at Darrow's reform initiatives flourishing beyond his own circumstances, mulled his options. The transformation he'd begun in training had taken root. He no longer sought vindication, but sought understanding. That evening, Darrow joined a community military town hall at George Mason University. The auditorium brimmed with students, faculty, local residents, and police officers. Darrow stood at the podium, flanked by Chief Brennan and Dr. Khan. The audience's questions ranged from, "How will we measure success?" to, "Will there be consequences for officers who resist training?" Darrow answered each candidly: data transparency, quarterly public reports, and a zero-tolerance policy for non-compliance. When the microphone reached a young African-American cadet, she asked quietly, "General, how will you ensure our voices shape these policies, not just your own?" Darrow met her gaze. "By establishing advisory councils of diverse community representatives in every county. Your input will guide every revision. This isn't reform for you. It's reform by you." Applause rippled through the hall. In the back row, Collins watched, pride and regret intermingling in his expression. He realized that the movement he'd inadvertently catalyzed was bigger than any one man's misdeed. It was a collective pursuit of justice. Late that night, as Marcus Darrow returned to his quarters, he reflected on the day's progress. The path ahead remained steep, fraught with resistance and unforeseen obstacles. Yet the momentum was undeniable. Joint training workshops launching, federal grants approved, community advisory councils forming. From the ashes of a single act of prejudice had risen a blueprint for systemic change. Darrow paused on the threshold of his study, gazing at the framed photograph on his desk. Himself in uniform, standing with soldiers of diverse backgrounds, all eyes fixed on a common horizon. He smiled softly, knowing the work continued. Tomorrow, new chapters in this campaign would begin, but tonight, he allowed himself quiet pride. The seeds of reform were sown, and they had already taken root in the shadows of Fairfax. Trial and reconciliation. The early morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Fairfax County courthouse as Officer Bryce Collins and his attorney entered the courtroom. The air was tense. Rows of empty benches lay between them and the gallery, where community members, journalists, and fellow officers would soon gather. Collins paused by the defense table, smoothing the creases in his shirt, his heart pounding. Today marked the start of his formal trial for the false arrest and civil rights violations against Major General Marcus Darrow. Judge Amelia Hart presided, a seasoned jurist known for her impartiality and measured courtroom demeanor. She entered under a flourish of gavel strikes and took her seat. The bailiff called the court to order. Collins rose for the oath, his voice steady as he swore to tell the truth. Across the aisle, Assistant Commonwealth's Attorney Laura Jensen stood, poised to present the prosecution's case. Beside her sat civil rights attorneys from the Department of Justice, their notebooks open and pens at the ready. Jensen approached the jury box to deliver her opening statement. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, Officer Bryce Collins swore an oath to protect and serve. Instead, on June 28, 2025, he used his badge to humiliate and falsely detain a decorated U.S. Army general, Major General Marcus Darrow, exploiting racial bias and obstruction of justice. You will hear audio recordings of racial slurs, see video footage of an unprovoked arrest, and read eyewitness testimony confirming that Darrow complied fully with lawful instructions. This case is about upholding our constitutional promise that no individual, regardless of race or rank, may be subjected to unlawful treatment. The courtroom fell silent as the jurors absorbed her words. Collins swallowed hard and lowered himself into his chair. His attorney, Marcus Reed, rose. "Members of the jury," Reed said, voice calm and measured. "Officer Collins acknowledges speeding at 23 miles per hour in a 30-mile zone, a minor infraction. But the charge of false arrest and civil rights violations is unwarranted. My client acted within his perceived authority. He believed Major General Darrow was evading arrest. This case is not about race. It is about a simple misunderstanding exacerbated by miscommunication. We ask you to consider the facts carefully before condemning a dedicated public servant." Witnesses took the stand in succession. First, Detective Laura Simmons, who arrived at the scene minutes after Darrow's arrest. Under direct examination, she described seeing Darrow seated in the patrol car with hands cuffed behind him, the general's posture calm, but wrists bruised. "He never resisted," Simmons testified. "He answered every question." Officer Collins seemed determined to assert control. Next, a neighbor, Mrs. Evelyn Morris, provided an eyewitness account. "I live across the street," she said. "I watched the entire incident through my window. I heard Collins say, 'I don't care who you are, step out of the car.' I saw the general calmly produce his ID, and Collins just snapped on the cuffs." Under cross-examination, Reed attempted to challenge her recollection, but Mrs. Morris remained steadfast. Then came the exhibit that shook the courtroom, cruiser dash cam footage. The video showed Darrow complying immediately, hands visible on the dash, formulating no threat. Collins barked orders, and after a blatant glance at Darrow's army insignia, insisted on handcuffs. The audio captured Collins muttering, "Let's see how you like protesting now." A collective gasp rippled through spectators. The jurors exchanged glances. The prosecution's final witness was Major General Darrow himself. Dressed in civilian attire, he carried himself with quiet dignity as he took the stand. Jensen asked him to recount the events. Darrow described the stop, his respectful salutes, and Collins' refusal to verify credentials. He spoke of his sense of shock and disappointment, how he had believed that his years of service and reputation would be enough to receive fair treatment. Darrow's testimony was measured, without rancor. "I held no anger toward the officer personally," he said. "I believed in due process and sought only to protect my rights and those of every citizen." During cross-examination, Reed probed whether Darrow had ever used his rank to bypass civilian authorities. Darrow replied, "Never. I respect the separation between military and civilian jurisdictions. I attempted to resolve the matter through proper channels before contacting the Pentagon." His composure underscored his credibility. After closing arguments, Jensen emphasizing the constitutional breach and Reed urging empathy for a good cop in a bad situation, Judge Hart delivered her instructions to the jury. She reminded them that their duty was to weigh evidence impartially and determine whether Collins had willfully deprived Darrow of his civil rights through false arrest. The jury retired. Tension mounted in the courtroom as spectators whispered among themselves. 2 hours passed before the jurors returned. Judge Hart called the court to order. The jury foreperson stood. "We find the defendant, Officer Bryce Collins, guilty as charged on both counts, false arrest and deprivation of civil rights," she announced. Collins sagged, eyes wide, as a murmur swept across the courtroom. Silence fell. Judge Hart addressed Collins in a firm yet compassionate tone. "Officer Collins, this verdict reflects both the evidence presented and our fundamental ideals. The sentence you will receive is designed not only to punish, but to rehabilitate and restore community trust." She scheduled sentencing for 4 weeks later, allowing Collins time to engage in recommended restorative programs. Outside the courthouse, a throng of reporters clamored for statements. Collins emerged flanked by his attorney, his head held higher than expected. Journalists shouted questions. "How do you respond to the verdict? Do you accept responsibility? What will you do next?" Collins nodded solemnly. "I respect the jury's decision," he said into a microphone. "I apologize to Major General Darrow and to the people of Fairfax County. I have been humbled and will dedicate myself to making amends." Then, to the assembled onlookers, he added, "I will continue my training and community engagement. I hope one day to regain your trust." Darrow arrived moments later for a scheduled press conference. He paused to speak beside Collins, a deliberate gesture of reconciliation. In his hand, he held a folder containing recommendations for community-led oversight boards and officer peer review panels. Addressing the crowd, Darrow began, "Today's verdict was an affirmation of justice, not vengeance. Officer Collins has apologized and accepted the court's judgment. Now, we must look forward. I invite the Fairfax County Police Department, community leaders and residents to join me in establishing citizen oversight councils and enhanced training programs. We must transform this moment of failure into an enduring foundation of trust." The cameras zoomed in on the two men standing side by side, once adversaries, now unlikely allies in the pursuit of reform. Collins glanced at Darrow, gratitude and resolve mingling in his expression. In that instant, history witnessed a rare convergence. Uniformed service and civilian law enforcement united under the banner of accountability. Later that evening, a candlelight vigil organized by local activists gathered outside the courthouse. Participants carried lanterns bearing messages: "End racial profiling, justice with compassion, together we serve." Collins and Darrow both attended, moving through the crowd hand in hand with community leaders. They listened to speeches by victims of bias and offered words of comfort. Under the glow of lantern light, Darrow reflected on the path from wrongful arrest to collective renewal. He placed a hand on Collins's shoulder. "We've come a long way, Bryce, but the work continues." Collins nodded, eyes misting. "I'm ready, sir." In that moment, two men from different worlds forged a partnership rooted in integrity and shared purpose. From the courtroom's verdict to the vigil's solidarity, the fractured bonds of Fairfax County were beginning to heal. And as the flickering lights swayed in the night breeze, a promise of genuine reconciliation shimmered on the horizon. Bridges of trust. The first light of dawn crept across the Fairfax County training yard as Major General Marcus Darrow stepped onto the asphalt expanse. Rows of local police officers and service members from the Army and Air Force stood at attention, their uniforms immaculate beneath the soft glow of sunrise. Today marked the inaugural session of the Joint Community Engagement and De-Escalation Workshop, a milestone initiative born from the shared resolve to transform a city's fractured relationship into a model of collaboration. Darrow cleared his throat before the assembled ranks. Good morning. We gather not as separate institutions, but as partners in public safety. Our goal is simple: to ensure that every citizen we serve feels protected, respected, and heard. His gaze swept across the officers, some still wary, others openly curious. Among them stood Officer Bryce Collins, his posture straight, eyes fixed on Darrow with both humility and determination. Behind Darrow, Brigadier General Sarah Nguyen and Chief Thomas Brennan exchanged approving nods. Nguyen stepped forward, outlining the day's agenda: scenario-based role-plays, community feedback roundtables, and an open listen-and-learn forum with local residents. Each element aimed to break down siloed thinking and cultivate empathy. The first exercise placed officers in civilian roles. Darrow acted as the citizen, holding a mock phone call about a noise complaint. Officer Collins, playing the responding officer, approached with hands visible and tone open, asking clear questions. Can you describe the issue? How can I help? Rather than issuing commands. Collins listened intently as Darrow described an imagined neighbor's late-night gathering. When Darrow voiced frustration over past experiences of feeling unheard, Collins apologized sincerely. I understand your concerns. Let's work together to resolve this. The group applauded. The exercise illuminated how language and posture shape outcomes. Next came the military-civilian team drills. Army lieutenants partnered with police sergeants to navigate simulated traffic stops. In one scenario, the driver exhibited erratic behavior, refusing to show documents and becoming agitated. The pairs practiced de-escalation tactics, giving the driver space, using calm verbal cues, and calling for backup when necessary. Darrow observed as police officers shadowed Army officers' habit of explaining every action aloud. I'm issuing this instruction so you feel safe, while military personnel adopted police techniques such as active listening and I'm here to help framing. By mid-morning, the asphalt yard gave way to the adjacent community center. Local residents, including Pastor Samuel Whitaker and student activist Maya Patel, awaited in a sunlit gymnasium. Folding chairs formed a circle. Walls were adorned with posters bearing workshop slogans: Listen first, Act second, and Serve with empathy. At the center lay a stack of blank cards for anonymous feedback. In the Listen and Learn forum, community members described their experiences. Late-night stops that felt like interrogations, stops based on racial profiling, and instances where officers never explained their actions. Officers and service members listened without rebuttal. When Maya Patel spoke of her brother's anxiety around police cars, Collins quietly passed her a water bottle, an unspoken apology. At the end, residents wrote suggestions on the cards. Officers should always state their name and badge number. Allow phone calls to family immediately. Provide clear directions, not commands. Darrow collected the cards, promising to integrate each point into policy drafts. After lunch, the workshop moved indoors to the department's virtual training suite. Participants donned VR headsets for immersive simulations: a domestic dispute, a mental health crisis, and a traffic stop involving a deaf motorist. Each scenario tested cultural sensitivity, patience, and crisis intervention. When an officer used excessive force in simulation, an alert paused the exercise and a counselor debriefed the participant. Military personnel observed how use of force continuum training could integrate non-lethal alternatives, verbal persuasion, tactical repositioning, and de-escalation holds. Meanwhile, Collins assisted in setting up a night patrol simulation for community volunteers. Armed with body cameras, volunteers role-played citizens reporting suspicious activity in a low-income neighborhood. Officers approached in pairs, demonstrating respectful protocols, announcing presence, asking permission to speak, and providing explanations. Volunteers rated each interaction on a questionnaire: clarity, respect, and perceived fairness. Results showed a marked improvement from prior ratings. Respect scores jumped from 60% to 85%. As the day concluded, Darrow and Chief Brennan reconvened with community leaders and workshop participants in the conference room. Nguyen presented preliminary data, reduced use of force incidents, and increased mutual trust metrics. Public Affairs Officer Emma Reyes shared social media sentiment analysis. Posts about positive collaboration outnumbered negative mentions by 3-1. Still, internal surveys indicated some officers felt uncertain about jurisdictional boundaries. Darrow addressed this concern directly. Our partnership respects each agency's authority. We're building bridges, not erasing lines. When at an incident, you'll know who leads, who supports, and how to ensure seamless cooperation. That evening, at the Fairfax County Police Station, Officer Collins joined a civilian ride-along program with Mrs. Evelyn Morris. They patrolled residential streets, conversing about family, community events, and shared interests. Morris asked about Collins' path to policing. He spoke candidly of his mistakes, the trial's lessons, and his commitment to change. Morris smiled warmly when he admitted his initial resistance to training. "I thought I had nothing left to learn," he confessed, but found new perspective in hearing citizens' voices firsthand. Across town, General Darrow returned to his quarters and reviewed a draft interagency memorandum of understanding. The document codified joint training requirements, data sharing protocols, and community advisory boards with veto power over policy changes. Darrow annotated the draft with feedback from the day's sessions. Clarity on reporting channels, timelines for implementation, and public transparency clauses. He sent it to Attorney General Kimberly Rossi for legal refinement, and to Secretary of Defense Christine Mitchell for strategic alignment. As night settled, Darrow headed to a local community vigil organized by George Mason University students. Lanterns glowed beneath oak trees as participants recited poetry, shared testimonials, and lit candles of remembrance for victims of systemic bias. Darrow stood at the edge of the circle, listening to Maya Patel speak about hope. "We can't forget the scars of the past, but we can choose to forge a different future." He stepped forward, placing a candle beside hers. When it was his turn to speak, he addressed the crowd. "Tonight, we honor those who suffered injustice. Let us carry their memory forward, not as a burden, but as a beacon guiding us toward equality." Officer Collins joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder. Collins's uniform bore a new humility. He spoke softly. "I stand with you all, and I vow to be the first to admit my faults, and the last to forget your voices." In that circle of flickering lights, military, police, and civilians merged into a single community, determined to rise above a painful incident. The bridges of trust they built today spanned chasms of history, prejudice, and mistrust. As the vigil concluded, the participants dispersed carrying lanterns and a renewed sense of purpose. Back at his quarters, Darrow updated his journal. Day 45 of Reform. Today we bridged institutions and hearts. Real change happens not from mandates, but from shared experiences and genuine listening. The road ahead remains long, but tonight we walked a vital mile together. As he extinguished his lamp, Darrow felt a quiet confidence. The story of Fairfax County was shifting, from confrontation to collaboration, from suspicion to solidarity. And though history would remember the racist arrests that ignited this movement, it would also remember the bridges built in its aftermath, bridges strong enough to carry a community toward a more just tomorrow. A new dawn in Fairfax. The morning sun rose warmly over Fairfax County as Major General Marcus Darrow stepped onto the steps of the new Community Police Military Collaboration Center. A sleek plaque by the entrance bore the names of the founding partners: the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, Fairfax County Police Department, and the George Mason University Community Initiative. Darrow paused to touch the plaque, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingertip. This center, once a blueprint on his desk, now stood as a living testament to months of tireless work and collective resolve. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Recruits in police uniforms exchanged greetings with cadets in army fatigues. Community volunteers manned information booths alongside Pentagon interns. Vibrant murals lined the walls, depicting scenes from the reform journey. The traffic stop that ignited change. The courtroom where justice was served. The town hall dialogues that forged understanding. Darrow's gaze lingered on a mural of the candlelight vigil, its warm glow captured in vivid color. Each image reminded him of the journey from fracture to unity. He made his way to the central conference room, where the first Joint Steering Committee meeting was about to commence. At the round table sat Chief Thomas Brennan, Pastor Samuel Whitaker, student activist Maya Patel, Colonel David Harris of Army Policy, and Deputy Attorney General Malik Carter. Each member represented a vital voice: law enforcement, faith leaders, youth advocates, military strategists, and legal guardians. Darrow stood at the head of the table, cleared his throat, and nodded. "Thank you all for coming. Today marks the official launch of our collaborative oversight body." Pastor Whitaker smiled and offered opening remarks. "When we first gathered, trust was a distant hope. Today, our institutions commit to listening, learning, and leading together. May this partnership endure beyond our lifetimes." The room fell silent, the weight of his blessing resonating among those present. Maya Patel tapped her pen on her notebook and spoke next. "Our communities demanded a seat at the table. Now we have one. Let's ensure our oversight panels reflect the full diversity of Fairfax County." Her words reinforced the promise of inclusion. Chief Brennan unrolled a series of charts: community satisfaction surveys, use of force data, and officer retention rates. "Since the reforms began," he reported, "we've seen a 25% decrease in complaints and a 15% increase in minority recruitment. Our next goal is to integrate these best practices into statewide training curricula." He looked to Darrow. "Your leadership paved the way." Darrow nodded, acknowledging the chief's stewardship and the department's willingness to embrace reform. Next, Colonel Harris presented the finalized Memorandum of Understanding. It formalized joint training schedules, data sharing protocols, and community liaison roles embedded within each agency. "Our pilot program in Fairfax will now expand to 3 additional jurisdictions," he announced. "We have secured congressional funding to support these expansions over the next 2 years." A ripple of applause followed, signaling collective pride in the progress achieved. Deputy Attorney General Carter laid out the legislative roadmap. "Federal grants will now require compliance with our credential verification protocols and bias training standards. We're also exploring incentives for departments that demonstrate measurable improvements in community trust metrics." His presentation concluded with a slide titled, "Sustaining the Momentum," which outlined quarterly reviews and public reporting requirements. Darrow reflected on how far the movement had come, from a single unjust arrest to systemic policy shifts across multiple states. With formalities complete, the committee shifted to planning public engagement. Maya proposed mobile listening labs, pop-up events in underserved neighborhoods where residents could share feedback directly with officers and soldiers. Pastor Whitaker suggested partnering with local faith-based organizations to host these events after worship services. Chief Brennan volunteered precinct space, and Colonel Harris offered logistical support from Department of Defense community outreach teams. The synergy of ideas underscored the collaborative spirit Darrow had sought to cultivate. Meanwhile, Officer Bryce Collins arrived at the center's back entrance to oversee a volunteer tutor event, another initiative born from the reforms. He greeted local teens, guiding them through driver's education modules, his demeanor patient and approachable. Collins paused when he spotted Darrow entering the lobby. Their eyes met, and Darrow offered a nod of respect. Collins returned it with a determined smile, mindful of the journey that had brought them here, from wrongful arrest and trial to shared leadership in community healing. Later that afternoon, Darrow and Collins reunited in the center's courtyard, where olive trees symbolized peace and resilience. Collins held a sapling he'd cultivated with students from the tutoring program. "I'd like us to plant this together," he said. Darrow accepted the sapling and knelt beside him. As they lowered the young tree into its new home, Darrow placed a hand on Collins's shoulder. "This tree will grow strong because we planted it together, roots entwined, just as our communities are now." By evening, the center hosted a public open house. Families meandered through exhibits detailing the reform timeline, interactive displays on de-escalation techniques, and kiosks where citizens could file commendations or concerns. A stage was set for speeches. Darrow stepped up to the microphone under string lights. The crowd gathered on folding chairs. He spoke of accountability, compassion, and the enduring promise of a nation united under justice. He emphasized that real change required ongoing vigilance. Our work does not end here. This center is a beacon, a starting point for deeper understanding and stronger bonds. Collins joined him on stage, drawing applause from the audience. He addressed the crowd with humility. I stand before you today not as the officer who failed, but as one who learned. I commit myself to listening always, to admitting mistakes, and to rebuilding trust one interaction at a time. Thank you for believing in the possibility of change. The audience rose to their feet, cheers and cheers of approval echoing beneath the evening sky. As the open house concluded, Darrow walked through the center's corridors, lights dimmed one by one. He reflected on the arc from the first chapter of his ordeal, the traffic stop that ignited this journey, to this moment of collective triumph. The center stood silent now, waiting to serve Fairfax County for generations. He paused before the mural of the candlelight vigil, tracing the painted faces of activists, officers, and families. Their eyes seemed to watch him, reminding him that leadership demanded more than directives. It required empathy, courage, and unwavering commitment. Finally, Darrow exited the building and stepped onto the lawn. The night was clear, stars shimmering overhead. He raised his gaze to the sky, absorbing the stillness before the next day's challenges. Then he turned toward the darkened silhouette of the Pentagon on the horizon, where new duties awaited. With each step back to his vehicle, he carried with him the knowledge that justice had prevailed, and that through unity and perseverance, a community scarred by injustice could heal and flourish. Tonight, Fairfax County slept under a new dawn, one born from accountability and sustained by partnership. And as the first light of tomorrow approached, Major General Marcus Darrow knew that the true test of leadership would always be measured not by the battles won, but by the bridges built.